Proverbs chapter 16. Hollywood loves to glorify the lifestyle of being footloose and fancy-free, of doing everything on a whim, of having no plans. If you decide this minute you want to jump in the car and go there, you do it. If you decide that you want to sell everything you own and move over there, you do it. Whatever hits you at the moment makes life exciting. And so they glorify it. And yet Solomon paints a totally different picture for the righteous. In Proverbs 16, the plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. Verse 3, commit your works to the Lord, your plans will be established. The Lord has made everything for its own purpose. In verse 4, verse 7, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies be at peace with him. Verse 9, the mind of man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. The plans, verse 1 again, the plans of the heart belong to man. That word plan means to carefully arrange things. It is the word that is used in Genesis 22 and verse 9 when Abraham stacks up the wood for the altar when he is going to sacrifice Isaac. Arranging things a certain way. It is the word that is used in Genesis 14 when the kings go out to battle and it says they arrayed for battle. It is the idea of well-crafted, well-organized, put together a certain way. In Job, it's used two different times to talk about the idea of a well-crafted argument. And so notice the opposite as we get started. The difference in footloose and fancy-free and plans. Organization, having a plan to get from where I am to where I am supposed to be. Proverbs is all the way through encourages the idea of a man who has taken the time to map out his life. It celebrates the idea of setting noble goals and the determining a course of action to get there. Now, we all understand. We all know, what is it that Robert Burns said, into a mouse, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, is how we translate it, even though he uses older English than that. We can make plans all day long. And that does not always mean they're going to come to fruition. But the point, if we watch Solomon, if we listen to what he says, if we listen to the rest of it, it begins to make sense. In fact, because I didn't type it, I'm going to have to go to my phone. I want you to hear Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 1 from the New Century Version. People make plans in their minds, but only the Lord can make them come true. Oh, wow. So Solomon, my part in it is making the plan. My part in it is doing all the preparation, but at some point I have to turn it over to the Lord. Staying in the New Century Version, verse 4, the Lord makes everything go as He pleases. He has even prepared a day of disaster for evil people. Verse 9, people may make plans in their minds, but the Lord decides what they will do. So, we make plans. And they're good plans. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong with them if they do not come true. Because sometimes God has a different plan. Sometimes the world we live in steps in. Today's a really good time to talk about this because just recently Gilbert and I were talking about, he has plans to live to 100. He's got it on the calendar. And his plan was, if I live to be 100 and Dalma Ann goes with me, we'll have been married 80 years. That's a noble plan. That is a noble goal. And this is a man who gets up every day and goes and walks. This is a man who takes care of his body. This is a man who, when he had a heart attack years and years ago, never violated the heart doctor's instructions from that day on. He is the cleanest chicken and fish eating dude I have ever met in my life. He gets on to me all the time because fish has to be fried. Period. Plain and simple. Good plans, but life intervenes. And so what I want us to think about tonight is, number one, yes, we absolutely need to give careful thought to the direction of our lives. It is okay to be footloose and fancy-free to some extent. It's okay to be spontaneous. It's okay to have fun in that way. But over the course of life, we need a plan. We need to know where we're trying to go in our lives, physically and spiritually, so that we're not leaving things to chance. We're not hoping that we're aiming at heaven and we get there accidentally. We know where we're aiming. We know where we're going. We have a plan, and so we chart a course. Look, sometimes just stop and read Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and notice the emphasis on planning, having a course of action. Notice the emphasis on the fact that it is to be noble. That God, did you hear what he said? He's even got plans for the wicked, and so God knows how it ends. So he wants us on the side of the righteous. Notice in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes the continual encouragement to listen to sound advice. I was reading something recently, and it was written to our kids in a sense, and it was talking about this idea. You know, we get out of high school and kids aim in some general direction in their life. I'm going to go to college, or I'm going to go to work. And that, for a lot, that's as far as the planning goes. And he was saying that, young people, listen. Young people, allow those who have already walked the path to help you understand that you have to aim at something to hit it. But we're going to broaden it because even at my point in life and yours, it still applies. We still have to have a plan how I'm getting from where, what's the goal this year? More like Christ each day. How do I do it? What is the plan? What is the plan when Rob gets up in the morning of how in that one day he's going to be more like Christ when the day ends? What are the intermediary goals? How are we going to get from point A to point B? And so we listen to sound advice. Talk to those who've lived life successfully and learn from them. Number 2, priorities. When we start making our plan, notice in Proverbs 16 the emphasis on turning it over to God. Matthew 6 and verse 33, seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these other things will be added unto you. And he's talking about God taking care of the physical needs that we have. But it's priorities. What are my plans about? Am I planning for spiritual success? Or am I just focusing on the physical success? Am I planning for that point where whenever it comes, and we're going to get to number 3, and it's expect the unexpected, whenever the end of this life comes, either because I pass away or the Lord returns, am I ready at that moment? And have I made plans so that when that moment comes, whenever it is, I'm prepared for it? Priorities. Am I choosing in my plans to serve Him? Am I choosing in my plans to do His work? Am I using my plan and my body and my mind to serve Him? Romans 6 verses 12 and 13. Colossians 3, 17, and then again in verse 23, the idea of doing everything that we do in His name and in His direction and doing it gladly and doing it with all of our heart. That's not an accident. And it can involve full-time ministry, but it also involves everyday life and how I use my secular gifts, how I use my secular work, how I use my secular wealth. I have to, this is verse 3 in Proverbs 16, I have to make my plans His plans, or really in truth make His plans my plans. That even though I am planning things out in my life, I am allowing Him to be the guide. I am allowing Him to set the goals. I'm allowing Him to set the path that takes me to those goals. Number 3, we have to understand that no matter how much we plan, what's the theme of Big Brother, the TV show? Expect the unexpected. Life's what it is. Life gets turned upside down in a heartbeat. Sometimes God says no. Sometimes it's because my plans aren't His plans. Or sometimes it's because my plan is good and His plan is great. It's because He has something bigger and better. So we have to be ready for the about face sometimes. We have to be ready for the point where God says, veer here or veer there. I mean, the Apostle Paul, you don't get any more faithful, and he says no. And Paul went back and he said no. And Paul went back and he said no. Job went to him and God said, you wouldn't understand if I explained it to you, so let's talk about something else. Let's see if you can answer my questions, Job. Peter's walking along the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus is telling him how he's going to die. And Peter is bothered enough by the plans that he tries to deflect the conversation to John. What about that one? Well, that's not my plan. So let's talk about why you're leaving John out of this conversation. Gideon, I promise you, when Gideon woke up that morning, it was not the plan that he was leading an army. God said, Gideon, veer right. Saul, that became King Saul, it wasn't the plan. Saul was hiding behind the luggage. Do not spot me. This is not what I want to do. The apostles. Matthew is happy and content at his tax table when Jesus interrupts him. Peter and John, Andrew, they're happy in the boat. And it's noble work. And God has a different plan. Plan life to the best of your ability. Plan it out as best you possibly can. Pray about it, but then put it in His hands. And let Him work it out His way. And this is what I'm going to end with. When we do that, we can learn to enjoy the ride. Everybody wants to be footloose and fancy free because you never know how it's going to end and you get to enjoy the ride. If you plan it and leave it to God and let Him do it, you're going to enjoy the ride when it matters the most. Because the destination will ultimately be a life that has pleased Him. So look back. The plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer comes from the Lord. Right now, where you sit, are you planning for the end of your existence in this world. I'm not being morbid. There is the real possibility. Planes are crashing this past week. Planes are almost crashing this past week. Are you planning for the moment that you will stand before God? Because if you do not plan for that moment, you will fail in that moment. And it'll be too late. If you need to obey the gospel, please do it tonight. Don't put off the plan. If you need to come home, please do it tonight. Do not put off the plan. And sit back and watch what amazing things God can do in you, through you, and for you as we stand and sing.